I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and in this episode I will give you an overview of the political history of the Kingdom of the Suebi. We will explore who the Suebi were, how they arrived in Hispania, the rise and fall of their kingdom, its revival, and how it was eventually conquered and absorbed into the Visigothic Kingdom of Toledo. In Julius Caesar's time, the Romans used the name Suebi to describe a group of Germanic tribes living east of the Elbe River, in what is now Germany and the Czech Republic. The term Suebi was a broad label, much like how some people use Westerner or African to describe people from very diverse backgrounds. The Suebi included various groups like the Marcomanni, Quadi, Alamanni, Bavarians, Thuringians, and Lombards. Some of these groups stayed where they were, giving their names to regions like Swabia and Bavaria, while others, like the Lombards, eventually established a kingdom in Italy. After the Hunnic Empire collapsed, a group of Suebi formed a short-lived kingdom along the Danube, but they were defeated by the Ostrogoths. But all those other groups labeled by the Romans as Suebi are not our concern here. We are interested in the Suebi who, along with the Vandals and Alans, crossed the frozen Rhine River on December 31st, 406, and caused some trouble in Gaul before crossing the Pyrenees in the autumn of 409. The Vandals, Alans, and Suebi were invited to Hispania by General Gerontius and his puppet Emperor Maximus, who needed military support against Emperor Honorius and the would-be Emperor Constantine III. In 411, just before their political project fell apart, Maximus made a deal with the peoples of the Rhine coalition to settle them in Hispania as allies, giving them food and supplies in exchange for their military service. The Suebi were the smallest group among those who crossed the Pyrenees, with about 25,000 people, including 4,000 to 5,000 warriors. Because of their limited numbers, they couldn't establish a strong, stable power and remain confined to Galicia, the Roman province in northwestern Iberia, which includes present-day Galicia, northern Portugal, and the provinces of León, Zamora, and Asturias. King Hermeric led the Suebi to Galicia, where they initially settled in the southern and western parts of what is now Galicia, as agreed with Maximus. The problem was that after the fall of Gerontius and Maximus, Emperor Honorius did not recognize the legitimacy of the treaty signed by Maximus. Instead, Honorius used the Visigoths to fight the Vandals and Alans in 418. The Suebi and some Vandals avoided the conflict, but since they were confined to the resource-poor province of Galicia, they soon began fighting among themselves. The Vandals attacked the Suebi in 419, and the Romans had to send an army to support the Suebi and keep the barbarians weak by pitting them against each other. This Roman intervention saved the Suebi from being wiped out by the Vandals in the Battle of the Nervasus Mountains in 420. After this, the Suebi remained the only barbarian group in Galicia, while the Vandals moved south to Baetica, in what is now western Andalusia. In 429, the Vandals left Hispania for North Africa. During their migration, the Suevic force led by Hermigarius tried to attack the rearguard but was defeated. At that time, the barbarian groups entering Hispania did not have established hereditary monarchies. The most prestigious warriors simply became leaders. We don't know if Hermigarius was a commander under King Hermeric or the leader of an independent Suevic group. Even without a strong Roman government and the Vandals far from Hispania, the Suebi struggled to establish a stable political power. They settled in fortified cities like Braga, Lugo, and Astorga, but we don't know how much they populated and farmed the rural areas. What we do know is that even in the 430s, the Suebi did not effectively control much of Galicia, partly because they were few in number. They faced resistance from the local population, who didn't want to pay them tribute or provide supplies. Because they were not well accepted, the Suebi often behaved like bandits or an occupying army, stealing crops and livestock, taking hostages for ransom, and besieging towns and forts to demand supplies. This was a time of disorder and instability, especially in what is now Galicia, with a constant cycle of peace agreements being made and broken between the Suebi and the local populations and elites. For this reason, Bishop Hidatius of Chaves led a delegation in 430 to request military intervention from Flavius Aetius, the strongman of the Western Roman Empire. However, the empire was dealing with more pressing problems elsewhere, and only sent a representative named Censorius to negotiate peace with the Suebi and restore order in the peripheral region of Galicia. Although Censorius didn't bring an army, his arrival seemed to have intimidated King Hermeric, who released captives without demanding anything in return, and was unable to secure recognition of the Suebi as allies of Rome. In 438, a sick and elderly King Hermeric stepped down from the throne, passing power to his son Rechila. This showed that Hermeric's leadership was strong enough to allow him to choose his successor, and that a Suevic king needed to exercise military leadership to maintain legitimacy, a role Hermeric could no longer fulfill. Rechila, unlike his cautious father, was ambitious and aggressive. He first secured peace with the northern peoples of Galicia, who had not yet been subdued, and then launched a campaign to plunder and expand into the provinces of Lusitania and Baetica. With the Vandals gone from the Iberian Peninsula and the Roman Empire severely weakened after losing Carthage to the Vandals, the Suebi took advantage of the power vacuum in Hispania to enrich themselves. The Suebi faced little resistance until they encountered a Roman army, likely raised privately by Hispano-Roman landowners, as there is no record of Emperor Valentinian III sending reinforcements. The Hispano-Roman army was defeated, and the Suebi captured their treasure of gold and silver. By 440, the Suebi had conquered Mérida, the capital of the Diocese of Hispania, where signs of reinforced walls and destruction in the surrounding areas suggest this conquest had a lasting impact. The following year they took control of Seville and expanded into parts of Carthaginensis. However, it's important to note that maps showing the kingdom of the Suebi controlling large parts of Hispania are misleading. Remember, the Suebi likely had an army of about 5,000 men. Even if they grew in numbers by recruiting some Hispano-Romans or other barbarians, they were still too few to control such a vast territory. They often didn't conquer cities through sieges because they lacked the necessary equipment and strength. Instead, they took cities through diplomacy, betrayals, and support from local elites, meaning with the collaboration of Hispano-Romans. The Suebi also didn't have enough men to properly garrison the cities they occupied and function more like a moving army. As a result, their effective control was limited, and their power was so fragile that their house of cards could collapse at the slightest gust of wind. Essentially, through these campaigns, the Suebic warriors gained wealth through tribute and plunder, but they weren't focused on building a stable kingdom. Lacking manpower, Valentinian III sent Censorius to negotiate a diplomatic solution to the Suebic expansion, but Rechila took him hostage. Between 441 and 446, Emperor Valentinian III launched 3 unsuccessful expeditions to Hispania against the Bagaudi in Tarraconensis and the Suebi in Baetica. The Bagaudi, who were likely Vasconic militias once loyal to Rome but now engaged in looting, are relevant to this story because they later allied with the Suebi. Rechila established Mérida as a royal seat for the Suebi, along with Braga, but he died in 448 and his son Rechiar succeeded him. Rechiar was unpopular with all the Suebic leaders, possibly because he had converted to Catholicism, unlike most Suebi, who were still pagan. It's unclear whether Rechiar's conversion was politically motivated to gain support from the clergy and Hispano-Roman population, or for other reasons. But it made him the first Catholic Germanic king, predating the conversion of the Frankish king Clovis by decades. While this is noteworthy, we shouldn't overstate its significance, as it didn't lead to the mass conversion of the Suebi to Nicene Christianity, which happened a century later. In 449, King Rechiar crossed the Pyrenees through Vasconia to Toulouse to marry the daughter of Theodoric, the king of the Visigoths. The fact that Rechiar was Catholic and Theodoric's daughter followed Arian Christianity didn't prevent this political alliance. On his way back to Hispania after the wedding, Rechiar met with the most important Bagaudi leader, and together they plundered the Ebro Valley and took captives. But in 451, Romans, Goths, and other barbarian groups, without the Suebi, fought the Huns in Gaul. This battle brought the Romans and Visigoths closer together, but the Suebi lost their alliance with the Visigoths, especially after Theodoric's death. In 453, Emperor Valentinian III negotiated with the Suebi and secured their withdrawal from Carthaginensis and parts of Baetica to the Strait of Gibraltar. The Suebi kept control of cities like Seville and Merida and gained Roman recognition of the kingdom of the Suebi's independence, similar to what had happened with the Vandal kingdom in North Africa. This allowed Rechiar to become the first barbarian king to mint silver coins with his name. But the joy for the Suebi was short-lived. The Western Roman Empire grew weaker after the murders of Flavius Aetius and Valentinian III, and the Vandal sack of Rome. Confident in his position, Rechiar broke agreements made with the previous emperor and led the Suebi in a campaign against Carthaginensis. A new emperor, backed by the Visigoths, issued an ultimatum to the Suebi, demanding their withdrawal from Carthaginensis. Not only did Rechiar ignore the warning, but he doubled down and attacked Tarraconensis. In response, with the emperor's approval, the Visigoths led by Theodoric II organized a large-scale campaign, joined by Frankish and Burgundian forces, to crush the Suebi in 456. Rechiar never expected such an overwhelming retaliation, and it cost him both his life and his kingdom. The few thousand Suevic warriors and their Bagaudi allies stood no chance against such a force, and, unsurprisingly, on October 5th, 456, the Visigoths and their Frankish and Burgundian auxiliaries crushed the Suebi at the Battle of Órbigo, near Astorga and León. Hundreds of Suebi were killed or captured, some called free, including King Rechiar, who was soon caught and executed. The city of Braga, home to the largest Suevic population, was sacked, and its churches were burned. The Visigoths, Franks, and Burgundians also looted Hispano-Roman properties, all under the guise of restoring Roman order. From Galicia, the Gothic expedition moved into Lusitania and Baetica to nominally re-establish Roman control. Merida avoided being sacked due to the intervention of its bishop, and there was little resistance because the outcome had already been decided at Órbigo. It thus became clear that numbers matter, and the kingdom of the Suebi collapsed. The Visigoths tried to integrate the surviving Suebi into their ranks, but this effort failed. In Galicia, the fall of the Suevic kingdom didn't bring peace, but rather chaos, violence, and civil war, as the power vacuum led to the rise of two rival Suevic factions. One group of Suebi operated in the south of Galicia, while the other was in the north. Neither had strong territorial control, and they acted more like bandits, raiding and living off the land. In 459, after Emperor Majorian had reconquered Gaul and reasserted control over the Visigoths and Burgundians, he launched a campaign with his Visigothic allies to restore Roman authority in Hispania. They captured some remaining Suevic garrisons in Baetica, but the main battles were fought against the Suevic factions in Galicia and Lusitania. The Romans managed to retake Lugo and Santarém, but couldn't completely crush the Suebi. After 9 years of power vacuum in Galicia, the Suevic civil wars ended in 465, when the king of the Visigoths diplomatically intervened in favor of Remisman, who became king of a reconstituted kingdom of the Suebi, now as a vassal of the Visigothic king Theodoric II. As a sign of submission, the Suebi converted to the Arian Christianity practiced by the Goths. However, after Theodoric II was assassinated in 466, or perhaps shortly before, Remisman ceased to consider himself a vassal of the Goths with the support of secular and religious leaders of Galicia and Lusitania. Remisman led raids against places like Conímbriga in present-day Portugal, plundering and devastating the fields. He also raided areas in Zamora, León, and Asturias. In some places, like Lisbon, local leaders accepted Suevic rule, showing a shift in attitudes among some elites after years of difficult coexistence. This change also happened as it became clear that the Western Roman Empire was collapsing and would be replaced by barbarian kingdoms. The kingdom of the Suebi under Remisman was expanding and consolidating, but this displeased the Visigothic king Euric, who saw Hispania as his next area of expansion, especially since the Visigoths were starting to face pressure from the Franks in the north. Since the campaign of 456, there had been a Gothic garrison in Merida, and it seems that Euric sent an army to harass the Suebi in Lusitania and along their eastern border. From that point on, the borders of the kingdom of the Suebi became relatively stable within the province of Galicia and part of Lusitania. Unfortunately for us, the Chronicle of Hydatius, the main written source on the kingdom of the Suebi of Galicia, ends in 469. This led to an 80-year period with almost no written records about the Suebi, except for some fragmented information. Ironically, this Dark Age was a key period for the consolidation of the Suevic kingdom in Galicia, as hinted at during Remisman's reign. We know from inscriptions about a few Suevic kings or possible kings, such as Beremen or Theodemen, but nothing is known about their reigns or even their historical authenticity. One of the few events we know about is the arrival of Britons in the northeast of Galicia and western Asturias around the year 500. Some Britons, who were a mix of Roman and Celtic cultures, left the British Isles when they were invaded by the Anglo-Saxons. Most of them settled in Armorica, the region in northwestern France that became known as Brittany. But a group migrated to the Suevic kingdom. The Britons were numerous enough to establish their own bishopric, the Bishopric of Britannia, which, according to research, was an ethnic rather than territorial bishopric, making it unique in the kingdom of the Suebi. On another note, in 538, Bishop Profuturus of Braga wrote to Pope Vigilius expressing concern that the Priscillian heresy still persisted, and that Suevic Arianism might contaminate the faith of the Catholic population. But in the 550s or 560s, the Suebi converted to Catholicism. A missionary from the Western Balkans, later known as Martin of Braga, arrived in the kingdom of the Suebi. He founded the monastery of Dumio and led efforts to eliminate heretical practices among the Romans of Galicia and the Suebi. According to the historian and bishop Gregory of Tours, a Suebi king named Hermeric was desperate because his son had contracted leprosy. Hermeric heard about the miracles associated with the relics of Martin of Tours, obtained some, and his son was cured. This miraculous event led to the conversion of the Suebi. However, Isidore of Seville offers a more plausible account, suggesting that before 561, a Suebi king named Theodemir promoted the conversion of the Suebi to Catholicism with Martin of Braga's help. This conversion strengthened the Suevic monarchy by broadening its support and uniting the Catholic Church with the state, a strategy that Visigoths would follow a few years later. It also helped the Suebi form political alliances with the Franks and the Byzantine Empire, aiming to prevent their kingdom from being annexed by the Visigoths. The Arian clergy were likely absorbed into the Catholic Church, as seen by the increase in attendees with Germanic names at the Council of Braga, from 1 in 561 to 5 out of 12 bishops in 572. Additionally, King Theodemir reorganized the church structure in the Kingdom of the Suebi by establishing new bishoprics and 2 metropolitan sees, in Braga and Lugo. This move detached some dioceses in Suevic territory from the bishopric of Merida, which was under Visigothic control. This reorganization was a way to consolidate a state church for the Kingdom of the Suebi. In 572, Suevic king Miro launched a campaign against Central Asturias and the region around Leon. The following year, Gothic king Leovigild seized a territory on the Suevic eastern border that was disputed by both the Suebi and the Visigoths, asserting Gothic dominance. In 574, Leovigild launched a campaign against the Kingdom of the Suebi. Miro quickly sought peace, offering to become a vassal and pay tribute to Leovigild. Leovigild accepted because he didn't aim to unify Hispania, as some later Spanish nationalists claimed. By accepting the tribute, he avoided the problems and costs of directly governing the Suevic territory and didn't have to negotiate with his people over distributing war spoils. However, in 580, Leovigild's eldest son, Hermenegild, rebelled against his father, justifying his war on religious grounds after converting to Catholicism. Reports differ on whether King Miro supported Hermenegild's rebellion. One version suggests that Miro initially supported the rebellion, but was forced in 583 to lay down arms, pledge loyalty to Leovigild again, and join the campaign against Hermenegild. Another version claims that Miro remained loyal to Leovigild from the start. Miro died during the campaign or shortly after returning to Galicia, and his son Eboric succeeded him, maintaining loyalty to Leovigild. However, some members of the Suevic aristocracy opposed this dependency on the Goths. Miro's relative Audeca usurped the throne from Eboric, had him tonsured, and locked him in a monastery, thus permanently disqualifying him from being king. But Leovigild wouldn't tolerate a rival power in Hispania, so he decided to conquer the Kingdom of the Suebi and integrate it into the Visigothic kingdom to prevent further attempts to evade tribute to Toledo. At that time, the Frankish kingdom of Burgundy attacked Visigothic lands beyond the Pyrenees and sent a fleet to support the Suebi, but the fleet was defeated. Without external help, the kingdom of the Suebi of Galicia, already weakened by internal divisions between those who collaborated with the Goths and those who resisted, couldn't defend itself against the Visigothic conquest. The information we have about the campaign is as brief as the conquest likely was. And in 585, the Suebi were defeated, the royal treasure seized by the Visigoths, and Galicia was annexed. Without an army and without a royal treasure, there was no kingdom, and thus the Suebi disappeared as a sovereign nation in Hispania. Only one Suevic leader, Malaric, rebelled a few months later, but his effort was quickly crushed. But how did the Visigoths successfully integrate the Suebi and the Hispano-Roman elites from Galicia? If we consider what we know about the Frankish royal treasures, the Suevic treasure likely contained not only gold and silver, but also important documents, like land ownership records and lists of gifts given by the monarchy to notable figures to secure their loyalty. These were the material pillars of royal power, and with them, wealth could be redistributed in the form of land and currency to win over support. The Visigoths were careful not to disrupt the wealth of the ruling elites in the former Suevic kingdom, aiming to prevent any unified opposition. To maintain stability in the newly acquired territories, the Visigoths made minimal changes. Even at the Third Council of Toledo, where the Visigoths converted to Catholicism, records still differentiated between the Goths and the Suebi. Historians Rafael Barroso, Jorge Morín, and Isabel María Sánchez have proposed that the rebellion of Duke Arguiman in 589 or 590 against King Rechiar likely took place in Galicia and was a significant military uprising. It's unclear whether this was an attempt to overthrow the Visigothic king or to restore the kingdom of the Suebi, but the authors suggest the latter. This indicates that the integration of the kingdom of the Suebi into the Visigothic kingdom wasn't as smooth or quick as written sources suggest. This is also supported by the ongoing military actions in Galicia well into the early 7th century, and by the hoarding of coins, likely as a response to the instability. Duke Argument, possibly of Suevic origin, was captured, had his right hand cut off to remove any claim to royal status, and was paraded through Toledo on a donkey as a public humiliation. The Visigothic kingdom not only integrated the elites of Galicia through good gestures, but also through the deterrent power of a strong military presence in Galicia before and after Duke Argument's rebellion to prevent further attempts at Suevic independence. Over time, a new Gothic Suevic aristocracy likely emerged, which by the second half of the 7th century held significant regional and provincial power within the Visigothic kingdom of Toledo. This has been suggested based on personal names of figures from the Visigothic kingdom that combine Gothic and Suevic roots. The importance of the former Suevic territory is reflected in the reigns of kings like Wamba, Hermeric, Rechila, and Witiza. Throughout the 7th century, the Visigoths saw their kingdom as consisting of three main regions: Hispania, Gallia, and Galicia. In other words, because the kingdom of the Suebi had existed for over a century, Galicia was viewed as a distinct region, no longer part of Hispania, a unique region due to its Suevic heritage. That's all for this episode on the political history of the kingdom of the Suebi. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment and share it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and podcast New History of Spain for more on the Suebi and other topics in Spanish history. If you appreciate my work and want to access exclusive benefits like appearing in the credits, getting exclusive merchandise, and early access to all my content, consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/newhistoryspain. Thank you very much for your support and see you soon!